People who work night shifts, graveyard shifts. What are your scary stories? I work in a prison and one night doing a round, I walked past a cell and thought I saw feet in a window. I doubled back thinking I had someone attempting to hang themselves and the cell was empty. I finished my round and as I walk past the last cell, I see an inmate looking at me and he said, "Don't worry boss, I saw him too." I work as a warehouse security in an industrial complex. I work Saturdays and Sundays when people are off and the warehouse is empty. This only happened last week and caught me by surprise since I've never experienced anything quite like this. Last Saturday while working halfway through my shift, I walk into the office section of the building where the nicer bathrooms in the facility are located. As I go to sit down on the toilet to read an ebook I had downloaded, I hear the women's bathroom door open and shut. I'm supposed to be the only person in the entire building and I've gotten no notification that someone would be there. So I finished my business and got up. While getting ready, I wear a light set of clothes under my uniform, so it takes a little longer, but not by too much. I hear one of the toilets in the women's bathroom flush, and then the door opens and closes again. I get the worst feeling of dread, worse than I've felt in years. Reluctantly, I get out of the bathroom. While on my way back to my office as I pass another set of bathrooms, 2 toilets flush and the payphone next to my office starts to ring. I checked the cameras and I got motion sensor alerts during the time I was in the restroom, but the kicker was that, when viewing the motion alerts on the recording timeline, nothing was going on. That feeling never went away until I got home and I stood in my car for the rest of the shift. I've heard things in the past, but nothing quite like this. This week was quiet like every other week before. My wife used to work in a preschool at a non-profit whose building used to be a hospital. When closing, she would often experience things like the lights turning off or the water in the sink turning on. She never felt threatened by it. Every time she would tell it to stop it or turn the water off, etc., and it would comply. She never saw this, but she told me that some of her coworkers that worked there late night have seen heads floating around then disappear. I work in an emergency room in an older hospital. There is a triage desk right across from my desk. One night, about 3:30 a.m., I was doing some paperwork and had that feeling that someone was watching me. Thinking it was a patient needing assistance or something, I looked up, there was no one where the patients usually are. I glanced over to the triage desk and there was this figure with no facial features, just a kind of see-through head. She was wearing the old-style nursing hat and white button up top, hair neatly pulled back and looked to be charting. I stood up because it scared me and must have blinked when I did, and it was gone. I told someone about it at shift change, thinking I was just overtired, and they said that this figure is irregular. She is seen all around the emergency by multiple staff doing her rounds. I used to work graveyard in a warehouse that used to be a high school. A student had hanged themselves from the stairwell and it didn't hold, and she fell to the first floor and landed with a thud. Sometimes I'm the only one working in my area, so I usually bring my AirPods and listen to music. The one day I forgot them, I hear a really loud thud like someone dropped a textbook on the ground. I go check around to see what it was. I search everywhere but the stairwell, and when I decide to check the stairwell, I see a girl on the ground with a pool of blood around her head. I freaked out and backed away because it scared me fleabless. The person who works in my area too looks at me and sees I'm sitting on the floor practically as white as snow. He asked what's wrong. I couldn't get a sentence out so I just pointed to the stairwell. There's nothing there. So I ask other people who have worked that same area if they've ever experienced that. Only one has, and that's how I found out about the girl. Definitely the scariest thing I've ever experienced. I work at a languages school that's located in the downtown area of my city. Lots of old buildings around. Our building was remodeled a few years back, and it's pretty modern these days. I'm a teacher here. I'm friends with the librarian. Sometimes, books that had been secured in place just fall off the shelves. This one time, we stayed after his shift was over, 8 p.m. Here, it's always after dark at that hour. We were waiting for another colleague who finished later to go get some drinks. Anyways, we turned down most of the lights so people wouldn't come in asking for books or whatever. We hear the distinct noise of newspaper rustling, kind of like someone's turning the newspaper pages. He went to check it out and, sure enough, a newspaper, which was usually left on the table so people could read it, had been spread on the table. I had helped him check the tables, so we knew it wasn't like that before. One time, I was doing some research, so I was authorized to stay a bit later than I should have. Suddenly, I heard the noise of someone typing on a computer. Every time I stopped reading and looked around, it would stop. As soon as I resumed reading, it started again. I was locked in and I had the only keys to the library. I just took the book I was reading and noped out of there. The cleaning and security staff have told me that on the 5th floor, the classroom doors close on their own, and that at weird hours, the elevator gets called up there. These days, cleaning staff makes a last round at around 9 p.m. when all classes are finally over, and if one of us is still in a classroom on that floor, they ask us to turn off the light before heading out, as they refuse to go back up there after they turn off the hallway lights on that floor. I know it's what you should do anyways, but sometimes you forget, especially if they haven't come in to clean up your classroom. Worked overnight at a large corporate office, and one night while doing rounds, checking doors, stairways, boiler rooms, there is a long hallway maybe 400 feet, with offices on both sides and a large window at the end. I'm walking down looking into the offices and in the window on the door, I see what looks to be someone standing behind me. I brushes my reflection and continue on. While walking down the hallway, I look at my reflection in the large window and continue to see something that looks like I have a second head. I start to do my rounds a little faster, getting more creeped out. Then my partner in the camera room talks over the radio asking me if an office employee is walking with me. I noped out of there and asked for a transfer the next day. I don't work the graveyard shift. I'm a teacher, but I've frequently stayed late during the winter months to try and catch up on work. Sometimes I don't leave until 7 o'clock-ish and by then, it's pitch dark outside. Many times while alone, I have heard children giggling. I've gone through the building, room by room, looking for the source since the idea of little kids locked in overnight is not pleasant. Never can find anyone. The doors and windows are locked, and no sign of anyone outside. Asked around and it seems lots of fellow staff who have stayed later than normal have heard the laughter, as well as other sounds. Now when I hear the giggles, I use my teacher voice and tell them to keep it down. Seems to work, so I'm fine with that. I used to work the 7 p.m. 7 a.m. shift as a nursing assistant about 15 years ago. I worked the surgical floor, so most patients were pre-post-op. But they would send up overflow from time to time, so we did have a death on occasion. Hospitals are generally well staffed at night, so I didn't spend a ton of time alone. But as an assistant, things like bathing people and changing beds was part of my job. One night, I was giving a patient a bath. He was elderly and barely there in all senses when I heard knocking. I checked the door and no one was around, so I shrugged it off and went back to work. Again, knocking, but it didn't sound like the door. The third time, I realized it was coming from the window. At first this confused me, so I just opened up the blinds, thinking maybe some kids were running around playing a joke. There were apartments nearby and kids are weird. When I opened the blinds, I suddenly remembered we were on the 2nd floor overlooking the parking lot. This sent a chill down my spine, and I waited to see if there was any movement or reasonable explanation. When nothing presented itself, I just freaked out internally and shut the blinds. I tried rushing through the rest of the bed bath, hoping it was over. When the knocking happened again, I didn't go look. I finished up, grabbed my stuff and got out of there. He ended up passing away a few hours later. I told a few co-workers, and they didn't seem surprised. Just kind of said that weird stuff happened like that, and you get used to it. So I worked in an old train depot that was built just before the Civil War and was a focal point of some brief fighting, got burned, rebuilt, then decommissioned into an event venue in modern times. The building was very long and narrow with high ceilings. The walls were native stone, exposed. The depot, while decommissioned, sat next to active tracks that were still in use, so if you weren't paying attention, you could have a train come roaring through all of a sudden and scare the bejesus. Some events were late night, and then a different event would be first thing in the AM. Say, a wedding that went to midnight and a trade show the next day at 6. When events were that close together, I'd have to go out to the depot and clean and flip it by myself in the middle of the night. One night, I'm there very late cleaning up after a wedding. Some decorations got left behind, which always happens. Tonight, they had left some helium balloons. I always managed to spook myself out in the depot. There were spiders that lived in the cracks of the native stone walls that would scuttle into their holes when you got close. The floors creaked at night, and the place echoed. Every sound was louder in that building, especially at night and alone. I was mopping the floor, moving backwards from the front and swishing the mop in overlapping figure eights, a technique I had heard they used on Navy ships. I got almost to the end of the main open floor when I saw movement from the corner of my eye. I turned and saw a balloon, floating about chest height so that the end of its string was just barely touching the floor, moving towards me down the middle of the building. The depot, which was already conspicuously silent, was at that time as silent and still as a winter night. The balloon floated from the hallway that connected the rear rooms of the depot to the big main event floor as smoothly as if someone was drawing it, along with a rod and reel. It stopped a few feet away from me. I was a child of the 90s, so I full expected the Tim Curry Pennywise to yell something at me from the balcony where they stored AV equipment. But nothing happened. It was hard staying calm and finishing up that night, but I imagine I set a time record. Worked in a surgery center after hours with one other employee. Tons of weird stuff has happened, but the most frightening was this. We were in the post-op area shutting things down for the night. My coworker comes to find me a few rooms down and asks if I just walked by the room she was in. I said, "No, I've been in here a few minutes, why?" She then says she saw someone out of the corner of her eye walk by while humming and wearing scrubs, same color I was wearing. A few minutes later, we were together and started to walk out of the post-op area after everything was shut down and lights were all off. We hear a strange noise, turn around, and see the main row of hallway lights turn on. They require a switch, not motion censored. We kind of freak out, and she yells out, "Okay, who is here to scare us?" We then proceed to walk towards that hallway and check all the rooms in it. Nothing. So we proceed into the product receiving area and notice that room hall had its lights on too. Those are motion activated, and we hadn't been in there all night. Those lights turn off after 5 minutes of no motion. She goes left, and I go right towards the exit door that leads to the parking lot. In the door's window, I see the reflection of my coworker and also a reflection of a woman who is standing and facing the wall right next to my coworker. Literally 2 feet away from her. I freak the heck out and go sprinting back into the post-op area. She follows me screaming, asking what the heck is going on. I told her what I saw, and we got the heck out of there. I've also had a bathroom door slam shut all by itself in that post-op area and the emergency call button be engaged. Nobody in it.